Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to our forecast, or you can check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for the state or your area in particular. You can also call our weather info line 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can also email us with the address at the bottom of the screen. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. Taking a look now, we'll start with our satellite imagery, our main low pressure system here out by the Unalaska area. You can see that starting to stall out. They're not really moving a whole lot as in reference to the eastern Aleutians there. As we watch again though, the front wrapping around this system is slowly pushing through much of the central part of the Bering Sea and out over parts of the Alaska Peninsula. The front also extends out well into the Gulf of Alaska as it's pushing forward, and we have a low pressure system developing off the triple point here, bringing in an influx of a lot of cloud cover and a lot of moisture from the south. And one last time we'll see out over much of mainland Alaska, not seeing a lot in terms of cloud cover at this time with high pressure dominating much of the area. However, you will notice that some of this may look slightly like cloud cover, but that's because the way the satellite is trying to interpret this, it see those really cold temperatures as potentially looking similar to clouds. As we look for the remainder of the day, weather, we do have that system coming up from the south, bringing in a lot more warm air and rain heading towards the Panhandle area, which will be nice, seeing those drought conditions there. Not going away, but at least getting some relief with some rain on the way. And we do have our high pressure that's dominating, extending out over much of the northern part of the state, but still keeping a lot of cloud cover away from places in the interior part of Alaska. And we do have that front pushing through the Gulf with some showers out ahead of it, bringing in some rain to the coastal areas with some snow as you get into the mountains for the southern end of Kenai Peninsula. So look up along the Arctic coastline, some light snow happening over much of the North Slope area. And then as we drop down the west coast of the state, not seeing much activity till we get back down towards our main low pressure system out by the eastern Aleutians, with the front wrapping around that system, bringing rain to areas all throughout much of the Aleutian Islands, into central Bering Sea and the Pribilofs, and then out by southwest Alaska as well. And with that southeasterly flow coming in, we will have some showers along the mountains as well, but as we get higher in the mountains, we are expecting that to be primarily snow, with rain more along the Bristol Bay coastline. Then down in the islands and the Alaska Peninsula, we are expecting to see some rain there with that southerly flow. For tonight, we are going to see that low starting to drift off more towards the east, towards the Gulf of Alaska area. And the front wrapping around that system, still bringing rain to much of the southern part of the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, way out there by the western Aleutians as well, expecting to see some rain. However, much of mainland Alaska should be held off from any of the precip until that front can push a little bit more to the north. And as we look along the Arctic coast, I'm expecting to see some fog develop for central and western parts of the Arctic coast, but as we get further off to the east, expecting there to be some light snow lingering there. Dropping down into the Gulf of Alaska to continue with our front, pushing along the North Gulf Coast. We are expecting to see some rain in a lot of locations from Kodiak Island up along the North Gulf Coast. But as we get into more inland locations and higher elevations along the coast, like the Kenai Mountains, we are expecting that to be predominantly snow. As we move along the coast, expecting more snow at Yakutat, and as we get down into the southeastern part of the state, bringing a lot of rain to coastal areas, but as we get further inside, we will expect that to start to become more snow. Some stronger winds potentially happening in those inside waters there as that front approaches from the south. As we move into Saturday, remnants of the front still bringing in some rain to areas of southeast Alaska. And again, as we get further towards inland locations and higher elevations, we are expecting that to be more snow. But as we get closer towards the Gulf, we will see primarily rain there, with some snow still in the Yakutat area, but rain just off the coastline. And actually starting to diminish now over much of south central Alaska, with just a few isolated areas of the southern part of the Kenai Peninsula seeing rain. Expecting with the remnants of this low as it continues to drift further to the east, now just south of Kodiak here on Saturday. As we look down southwestern part of the state, some lingering showers there as well, some lingering rain and snow mix in the mountains. But as we get closer towards Bristol Bay area along the coast, expecting to see some more rain there. And then especially on the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula and out towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, expecting to see some rain there as well. The rest of mainland Alaska shouldn't see any new precipitation, but as we get along the Arctic coastline, still expecting to see a lot of fog, especially in the morning hours for central and western parts of the Arctic coast, with some lingering snow showers as we get further off to the east. Should be pretty light, however. Then as we look down in the rest of the Bering Sea out in the Aleutian Islands, scatter rain showers out in those locations, but we should notice that we do have another system coming in from the west that's going to be bringing us rain as we move into Sunday. We'll see that rain coming into the western Aleutian Islands first, and then behind that cold front, colder air is expected, so we will see that starting to transition over to snow. This front's going to continue out ahead, but even ahead of that front, we're seeing that southerly flow bringing in rain showers to the central Aleutians out through much of the Bering Sea. And then as we get closer towards the Alaska Peninsula, seeing a little weak ridging there that's bringing in slight northerly flow. So again, on the Bering side of the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, expecting to see some rain showers there. Moving into southwest Alaska, not a lot of activity except around the Kuskokwim Bay area, where we are expecting to see temperatures just cold enough to bring in some isolated snow showers to the area. Up along the west coast, we will see a rain and snow mix at St. Lawrence Island, and then as we get closer towards the Seward Peninsula, expecting to see that be primarily snow. But as this warm front pushes into the area, expecting that transition from the snow more to the rain. Along the Arctic coastline, finally going to clear up on Sunday, as well as much of the interior part of the state. Not expecting a lot of activity as we have some high pressure up further to the north, and then as we drop down to south central area, clearing out a lot of those locations, as well as the low that was our big system earlier has now drifted all the way across the Gulf of Alaska, and now we're bringing northerly flow out over south central Alaska, which is keeping much of the shower activity further into the Gulf. So we look down in southeast part of the state, we are seeing some flow, onshore flow, bringing in some more rain with snow as we get a little bit further inland, but that should keep much of the panhandle in those warmer conditions, primarily in rain. As we look at our low temps starting Saturday morning, we are going to see the warmest temps furthest south in the panhandle, up to as high as 40 degrees there, but dropping down below freezing as we get further to the north, especially as we get up by Haines, Skagway, and Yakutat. So we look out over the south central part of the state, temperatures dropping into the 20s for most of the coastal locations, down a little bit colder as we get into more interior locations, especially Copper River Basin, where we're going to drop down to -8 at Glen Allen. However, as we drift a little bit further to the south towards Kodiak City, expecting only to go down to 42 degrees tonight. So you move up into the interior part of the state, primarily seeing temperatures well below zero, with the coldest being Arctic Village, dropping all the way down to -20 tonight. And then as we look along the Arctic coastline, dropping down just below or into the single digits there, and some places a little bit further to the west staying a little bit warmer until we get right along the west coast, and we're seeing temperatures only dip down into the mid-20s there. So look down at Gamble, only getting down to 34 degrees, should stay above freezing. And as we move down into the YK Delta area, areas a little bit further to the north towards Norton Sound should stay a little bit colder there, but as we get down into the Kuskokwim Delta area, only getting down into the mid-20s. Mid-30s as we drop around Bristol Bay, and staying in the 40s throughout much of the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Islands until we get further out to the west towards the Shimia area, where we drop down to 39 degrees. 39 degrees also expected low for Saturday morning for St. Paul. As we move into Saturday afternoon, temperatures not changing a whole lot out over the Bering and Aleutians, but getting up a little bit into the mid-40s for the most part, right around 50 degrees for the Alaska Peninsula. And then as we look into the Bristol Bay area, Dillingham getting up to 41 degrees, Iliamna 43 degrees, and right above freezing for much of the Kuskokwim Delta area. However, up a little bit further to the north, Amonic only getting up to around 28 degrees, whereas we will get above freezing for Nome. 33 degrees is expected for Saturday afternoon. Up around the Kotzebue Sound area, we will have temperatures staying in the mid-20s there, and then warming up along the Arctic coastline into the upper teens, or right around 20 degrees for those more western locations, into the teens for many cases or many locations around the interior part of the state. Still a little bit colder up by the Fort Yukon and Arctic Village areas. But as we drop down into south central Alaska, getting south of the Alaska Range, now we are seeing temperatures rise to above freezing for areas along the coastline, staying a little bit colder up by Talkeetna, 29 degrees expected high there. And then 16 degrees for Glen Allen, getting above zero, but still not above freezing. And as we drop down into the Panhandle area, temperatures getting up above freezing for pretty much all locations, with the warmest again closest to the Gulf, with the highest there at Sitka, 48 degrees on Saturday afternoon. As we look for Sunday morning, we will see temperatures drop down into the 30s for most locations. Ketchikan staying a little bit warmer. They're only dropping down to 41 degrees Sunday morning. Then to the upper 20s along the coastline for the North Gulf Coast, with Kodiak staying warmer, only dropping down to 39 degrees. Single digits in the Copper River Basin, Glen Allen going down to 1 degree tonight. Staying above zero, which is going to be a little bit different from the interior, dropping down to below zero for pretty much all locations, with the pocket by Ambler staying a little bit warmer there, only dropping down to positive 8 degrees tonight, or Sunday morning rather. Along the Arctic coastline, staying above zero, but all going to be single digits. However, as we move closer towards the west coast of the state, only getting into the 20s for the most part. Kotzebue dropping down a little bit lower, down to 14 degrees, whereas Gamble is going to stay above freezing at 36 degrees for a low Sunday morning. Down into the 20s for much of the YK Delta, and the lower 30s just below freezing for the Bristol Bay area, and dropping down into the lower 40s to right around 40 for the Aleutian Islands. Taking a look then at high temperatures Sunday afternoon, getting up into the mid-40s again for the Aleutian Islands, up to the upper 40s for the Alaska Peninsula, and right around 40 degrees for the Bristol Bay area. Right about freezing for areas along the YK Delta, with Bethel getting to 32 degrees for a high Sunday afternoon. Then moving up the coastline, we do have temperatures in the 20s for the most part, a little bit warmer there at Nome, 33 degrees, breaking that freezing mark. Into the teens for much of the Arctic coastline and the interior part of the state, and getting up to around freezing for much of south central Alaska, and into the 40s for many places in the southeast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For our aviation section, we will start off Saturday morning looking out over the Bering Sea. We do have some MVFR conditions, especially in central southern Bering and down into the Aleutian Islands, out over the Alaska Peninsula, and some places in the northern part of the Bristol Bay area. Out over mainland Alaska, starting up in the Arctic coastline, we do have a lot of MVFR conditions there, with some IFR conditions further off to the east. In the upper Yukon Valley and the Copper River Basin, we are going to see some IFR conditions in the morning, and as we get into the northern parts of the Gulf, we do have some areas of MVFR and IFR throughout much of the northern Gulf and down into southeast Alaska as well. Moving into Saturday afternoon, a lot of the IFR conditions are going to clear up, but we will still have a lot of MVFR in the northern Gulf down in southeast Alaska, and still some areas of lingering MVFR conditions in the Copper River Basin, up in the upper Yukon Valley, and along the Arctic coastline, where we will still see some areas of IFR further out to the east. Down in the Bering Sea, we will see some MVFR conditions around the Pribilof Islands, down through the eastern Aleutians, and the Alaska Peninsula Saturday afternoon. Moving into Sunday morning, we're expecting to see some IFR conditions creep in out over the western Aleutian Islands. Then out for the eastern part of the Bering and parts of the YK Delta, we are going to see some MVFR conditions moving down into the Alaska Peninsula as well. Out over mainland Alaska, up along the Arctic coastline, we will have some MVFR conditions and still some areas lingering of isolated IFR conditions further off to the east. Down in the upper Yukon Valley, we are going to see some MVFR conditions, and then throughout much of the Gulf of Alaska, including Kodiak Island and areas of the eastern part of the Kenai Peninsula, MVFR conditions expected there, with more IFR as we get further off to the east to include southeast Alaska on Sunday morning. Then on Sunday afternoon, we are going to still see MVFR and IFR conditions for the Panhandle area going up through the Yakutat area, but much of south central Alaska is going to clear out, with the exception of the Copper River Basin. Still going to see some MVFR conditions there. MVFR conditions also expected for the upper Yukon Valley and along the Arctic coastline for Sunday afternoon. Down in the Bering Sea, more MVFR conditions expected. Then as we get out closer towards the western part of the Bering, western and central Aleutian Islands, expecting IFR conditions to move through those areas in the afternoon. Taking us to our passes, starting with Anaktuvuk Pass, VFR conditions expected for Saturday. Adigan Pass, VFR as well. All along the Alaska Range, we'll see a similar theme with VFR conditions, including Lake Clark and Merrill, Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, Isabel Pass, and Mentasta Pass, all expected to see VFR conditions throughout the day. Then Tanita Pass should see VFR conditions, and down in Portage, going to start off marginal but improve to VFR in the afternoon. For Chilkoot and White, expecting to see marginal conditions throughout the day. Looking at our freezing levels, we do have surface freezing line to the northern part of the Panhandle area, riding along the North Gulf Coast, out through southwest Alaska, and then up the coastline. We do have a tongue of warmer air headed towards the southeastern part of the state, with a frontal system pushing in, bringing in some warmer air to the area. Then way out to the west, we have some colder temps out over the Bering Sea, with freezing levels down to 2,000 feet. Taking us to our icing, expecting icing between 3,000 and 6,000 feet over the eastern Aleutian Islands, extending out over the Alaska Peninsula and over much of the southern mainland. Above 8,000 feet as we get closer towards the south central area, and then down around 3,000 to 6,000 feet for the Panhandle. And then some lighter icing up along the Arctic coastline on the eastern portions, below 2,000 feet there. Taking a look now at our jet stream, we'll notice a similar theme on all of our flight level winds. The strongest core of winds is going to be to the south of the Gulf of Alaska, and then extending out south of the Panhandle as well, with some weaker winds in the Gulf around 70 knots there at jet streak level, and then another jet streak coming in over the northern part of the coastline around 70 knots out of a westerly direction there. But that main core of winds again is going to be south of the area up to as high as 150 knots. So we drop down to 9,000 feet. We have some winds out of a westerly direction around 25 knots out over the southern Bering. So we get up into the northern Bering, turning to easterly, 15 to 20 knots there. Out over much of mainland Alaska, easterly flow anywhere from 10 to 25 knots. Strongest as we get into the Gulf, 40 to 55 knots further to the south, with some of those stronger winds up along the coastline in the southern portions of the Panhandle. So look down at 3,000 feet, expecting the winds out over much of mainland Alaska to be out of an easterly direction. Strongest core of winds going through the interior part of the state up to as high as 35 knots there. Strongest winds, once again, further to the south, just south of the Panhandle area, up as high as 50 knots along the coastline. Westerly flow in the Gulf of Alaska around 55 knots there for the strongest, just south of Kodiak Island. And then as we look out over our turbulence on Saturday, below 4,000 feet for the eastern Aleutian Islands, below 5,000 feet for much of the southwest part of the state, including areas of south central along the North Gulf Coast, and then a Panhandle below 6,000 feet there. We'll be back shortly.
My name's Tim Lesher, and I'm a zookeeper here at the Alaska Zoo. I think anywhere it's special and unique to work with wolves.
Ruby, come here, sweetie pie.
I have worked in a couple other zoos, and neither one of those zoos had wolves. We're not supposed to have favorites, but they're my favorite animals to take care of. They each have their own individual personalities, and so they can be challenging to work with in that perspective. I'm from Missouri. I grew up going to the St. Louis Zoo. Came up here for my wife's job. As soon as we got here, one of the first things we wanted to do was visit the zoo. We like to go to local zoos pretty much wherever we travel, and so I always thought it would be a great place to work. You know, I started volunteering here, and the position did come open, and I've been here ever since. We have 5 wolves here at the Alaska Zoo. The males have their social hierarchy, and then the females have their social hierarchy. Windy is actually the alpha. Denali, he's our alpha male. And so this is Ruby. We call her our beta female. Essentially, that means she's kind of the second female on the social hierarchy. And our omega wolf is Lucky. Roan was our omega wolf. Unfortunately, he's passed away. You know, if you've ever owned a dog, and again, I know that our wolves and any of our animals, they're not pets, but you're still caring for them on a daily basis. It's kind of similar to a pet passing away, I think, in the sense that this is a member of your family. You know, it's a member of the Alaska Zoo family. Our wolves came from a predator control area in Alaska. These wolves were going to be slated for elimination, and so our curator got a permit to go into the den and extract the wolf pups. So essentially, you could say that we saved them. You do have to remind yourself almost on a daily or weekly basis that, yeah, they are wild animals and they aren't pets. I was taking care of them for a while before we did a wolf walk, but the first time we took a wolf out, I was just, I remarked to our curator, are you sure this is okay? I kind of thought maybe I need to find a different line of work until I saw how these animals performed on the walks and how much they enjoyed it. They're very social animals, and so they're not just social between the wolves themselves, but between the wolves and the humans. There's a very strong bond and strong connection as well. I think the important thing of wolves being here at the Alaska Zoo is to allow the public to see wolves similar to the way they truly exist, not as we've perpetuated them in popular culture. Just walking by and hearing them howl can be such an impacting experience that it's kind of infectious. And then, if you're here by yourself, working at 6 a.m., getting started for the day, and you hear that howling, you kind of think it's just for you.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of our forecast. We'll start off with a quick look at the ice edge. We do have ice all along the Arctic coastline, with the main portion of the ice from the central and eastern portions. But it is of note that we do have a lead that has formed over the coastline of the Beaufort Sea, and that is expected to grow under the strong southerly flow of warmer air coming up for the next couple of days. As we look down now at the southeast part of the state, looking at our main marine forecast in the inside waters, we do have northerly flow up to the north out around 35 knots there expected for Saturday, and then that is going to switch up and become southeasterly in the southern part of the inside waters, around 30 knots there. Out in the Gulf, it's a little bit chaotic with some winds further to the south out of a westerly direction, 20 to 25 knots, gusts as high as 35 knots there. But as we move further north in the Gulf, it is going to become easterly with flow out of that easterly direction at 30 knots. As we move into Sunday out for the southeastern part of the state, flow up north very easterly with 20 to 25 knots of wind, 14 to 15 feet for seas. As we move further to the south in the Gulf, it is going to be more southerly, 20 to 25 knots there. Inside waters, southern portions are going to be southeasterly around 20 knots, but as we get further to the north, going to shift to the north out of that direction at around 25 knots there. Seas 4 to 5 feet in the inside waters. As we look for south central Alaska in the Gulf, easterly flow 30 to 35 knots for the most part. Prince William Sound going to see northeasterly flow 25 knots there. And then we are going to see in the Cook Inlet area northeasterly flow 30 to 35 knots, getting stronger as we get further to the south. And then as we get west of the Barren Islands, northeasterly flow 40 knots there. Seas up to as high as 11 feet west of the Barrens. As we move into Sunday, going to continue to see northeasterly flow, but diminish quite a bit, 15 knots for the Cook Inlet area. Out by the Barren Islands, northwesterly flow around 20 knots there, and then becoming more northerly as we get into northern parts of the Gulf of Alaska, around 20 knots, and north wind 15 knots for Prince William Sound. As we look Saturday around the Alaska Peninsula, flow around a low pressure system that is moving through the area is going to bring somewhat chaotic winds to these areas, with southeasterly winds around Kodiak Island, anywhere from 25 knots to 35 knots through Shelikof Strait, and then becoming more northerly as we get to the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula, 30 to 35 knots there, and then northerly also on the southerly side of the Alaska Peninsula, 30 knots there, with seas as high as 20 feet on the Pacific side. Then on Sunday, things are going to calm down quite a bit and become more west to northwest, where we are going to see winds on the Bering side 15 to 20 knots, and then 15 to 25 knots on the Pacific side, strongest to the south. And on Saturday out over the Aleutian Islands, we are going to see west to northwest flow on the Bering side from 20 to 25 knots, and on the Pacific side 25 to 30 knots, with seas as high as 17 feet as we get further to the east, south of the eastern Aleutian Islands. And then out west, we are going to see winds out of a westerly direction, 20 knots as we get by the western Aleutian Islands. Then on Sunday, those winds going to pick up quite a bit too, 40 knots. Still going to be out of that west-southwest direction with seas as high as 18 feet as we get further off to the west. For the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, flow out of a westerly direction, 20 to 25 knots there. Along the west coast of this state, we are going to see flow up to the north out of a northeasterly direction, 20 knots, becoming more easterly as we get along the YK Delta coastline, around 20 knots there, and then more northerly as we get closer towards the Pribilof Islands, around 15 knots. The strongest winds by the Kuskokwim Delta, around 30 knots out of a northeasterly direction on Saturday. Then on Sunday, westerly flow for much of the eastern part of the Bering Sea, 15 to 20 knots. Stronger as we get closer towards St. Matthew Island out of a southwesterly direction, 30 knots there. And then southerly 10 to 15 knots as we get closer towards St. Lawrence Island and the Norton Sound. Along the Arctic coastline, we are going to have winds out of an easterly direction around the west coast, up to as high as 30 knots by the Point Hope and Point Lay areas. Then as we move up along the Arctic coastline, weaker flow there around 15 knots out of a northeasterly direction. And on Sunday, picking up a little bit out of an easterly direction, 20 knots out of the Beaufort Sea, getting up to as high as 30 knots for Ukiagvik down by Point Lay areas, and then becoming southerly along the west coast, 15 to 20 knots. Quick recap for the state for tonight's weather. We do have our main low pressure system tracking solely to the east south of the Alaska Peninsula tonight, bringing rain to areas of the Alaska Peninsula throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, with the main part of that front starting to push through the North Gulf Coast, bringing rain to much of the area along the North Gulf Coast. But as we get further to inland and higher elevation areas, we are expecting that to be snow. That's going to be true in the southeast as well, where we are going to have some rain through much of the southeast areas, but as we get a little bit further to the north, closer to more interior locations, going to expect that to be snow. Interior should not see a lot of activity tonight, but as we move up along the Arctic coastline, we are going to see snow out to the east with fog over the central portions of the Arctic coast. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.
On Masterpiece.
I doubt George would approve of my visit.
I suspect him of being about some scheme or other.
Against me.
You lie!
Ross, enough.
Well, have you expelled from Parliament?
Look to the future.
I wish that were possible.
Well, when it's dead to me, I'll see what may be salvaged here, and then I'll be on my way.
Good gracious, Mrs. Warlincoln!
Dwight, help her!
Carriage, call for my carriage!
Poldark on Masterpiece.
Sunday at 8, only on Alaska Public Media.
George came into the world like every other baby. He was perfectly healthy. At the beginning of first